I want to take you all back to a special time, a time known as late 2011, more specifically early September of 2011. I was a young lad back then, full of optimism and vigor, fresh off the heels of playing really good games like Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect, and eagerly awaiting the release of both Batman Arkham City and Mass Effect 3. Yeah, that last one should probably give you a pretty good idea of why I am the jaded asshole you are currently watching/listening to for whatever reason, because you care about my opinion. I don't know why, but whatever. Anyway, back in this magical period where I was still young and optimistic and full of vigor, DC basically launched the New 52, and I was trying to get into comic books because Batman Arkham City was just blowing my mind. I was super hyped about that game. I read the prequel comic book by Paul Dini and Carlos Danda, and I just wanted to get into comic books. But then I saw, Action Comics number 920, and I was like, fuck this shit, I'm not getting involved in this. But then DC was like, hey, you guys want a fresh start in the DC universe, a fresh start for comic books? Here's the New 52. And the New 52 is going to be remembered as a divisive thing. A lot of people are going to hate it for years to come. A lot of people are going to love it for various reasons. But it was an all-over-the-map type release, which is a stark contrast to the current DC Rebirth line, which has been an all-around success, both financially and critically. DC Rebirth is kicking ass. It's just murdering all of Marvel's books at the comic book sales, from week to week to week. Even books that were just kind of whatever books, like Red Hood and the Outlaws, are now cracking the top 10. Green Arrow has been completely reinvigorated by DC Rebirth. It was like a whatever book as well for a vast majority of its existence in the New 52. And now it is one of the biggest success stories of DC, one of their big tentpole releases. And that's why I want to create this kind of context between the New 52's reception and the DC Rebirth reception, because there are two books that are diametrically opposed between New 52 and DC Rebirth. In New 52, the Batman ongoing book is considered the most consistently well-written book throughout the entire New 52 existence. It was consistently written by Scott Snyder and mostly drawn by Greg Capullo, and it is considered one of the most important and significant comic runs, not just on Batman, but of the past half-decade, for very good reason. And then there was a Superman ongoing book, just called Superman, not Action Comics and all that other shit. It was pretty bad for most of its existence. It was just a book that could never really get a great creative team going, and when a great creative team did eventually come, they fucked off as fast as they came around, and so it was a really floundering book. And this is where I create the context for this video, where I tell you that Superman by Pete Tomasi and Patrick Gleason is one of the best DC comic books out right now, and one of the best comic books period out right now. And Tom King's Batman is fucking terrible. Batman is the worst fucking book I've read of all of DC Rebirth. And that's saying a lot, because DC Rebirth has made me care about whatever characters like Deathstroke and Red Hood and the Outlaws. Like, these are books I would not have given one iota of a fuck about, like even as early as 6 months ago. But now, with the creative teams they got involved, they just work. Like, these nothing characters that I just didn't care about before are giving me more enjoyment than a fucking Batman ongoing comic book written by Tom King of Vision and Omega Men fame. And the biggest problem of Tom King's Batman is the problem of Batman right now, and will probably remain the problem of Batman as long as his stupid, retarded fanboys exist. And that is the problem of Batman is the greatest comic book character of all time because he's the most human of all of us. He's the guy who, if you shoot him in the head, he's probably gonna fucking die just the same as any other person. However, if you write Batman as a human being with limitations, with flaws, with things that he cannot do, things he simply can't do no matter how much money and time he spends on it, you are not writing Batman. You hate Batman and you're a fucking awful person. And that's a problem with Batman's character, and it's a problem with the way writers and fans approach the character of Batman. I would go so far as to say that the only guy who actually writes Batman as an actual human being or something that's a close approximation of a human being is Jeff Johns in Earth 1, and everybody fucking hates that because Batman's a jackass. Like, Batman is not perfect in that book. Batman has a lot of flaws in that book. He's not a master martial artist. He's not a great detective. He's not a ninja. He's got to learn this shit and improve as he goes on. And that's why I really like the Earth 1 series, because it isn't just Bat God who knows every fucking martial art ever from the beginning of time, ever since the beginning of his career, but it's a Batman who has to learn. And Tom King's book shows you why that whole mentality of Batman is the best character because he's the most human of all of us, but if you don't write him as the most OP motherfucker ever, you're worthless horseshit, why that it just doesn't work as a storyline. The very premise of the first arc of Tom King's Batman is this whole thing about two new Superman tier characters showing up in Gotham City, Gotham and Gotham Girl. And the storyline is trying to frame this as a tale of Batman coming to terms with the fact that he might not be needed in his city anymore, that for all of his money, for all of his training, for all of his ingenuity, Batman, if he has to stop a plane from crashing into the city, he can't lift it up into the sky like Superman can. In fact, he will more than likely probably fucking die trying to stop a plane crash into Gotham in a way Superman can just, fly up, get the plane out of the way, and land it safely into the ground. And the very first issue is a great setup for this kind of story because there is a literal plane falling out of the sky and coming to crash into Gotham, and Batman is really struggling with this. He is pushing himself to his absolute physical, mental, and technological limits. And if it were not for the intervention of Gotham and Gotham Girl, he would have died in his attempt to stop the plane crash. And this is a great way to set up these characters. It's a great way to set up to show you how Batman, for all the things he has, he does not have superpowers, and he cannot just stop a plane from smashing half the fucking city on its way down. But these two newcomers, this Gotham and Gotham Girl duo, these Superman tier characters can do that. And that's a great setup for the storyline. However, it goes immediately to shit in the opening of the next issue where Gotham and Gotham Girl cannot defeat Solomon Grundy, but Batman fucking can. And Batman doesn't beat him like barely where it's going to emphasize his limitations again. No, Batman practically one-shots Solomon fucking Grundy without a power suit, without any special gadget or anything. He just basically uses a fundamental taekwondo move that my fucking dad knows, and he beats Solomon Grundy. But these two Superman tier characters, they can't fucking do that. And the rest of the arc spins against the way it drives. It's very clearly a storyline that's trying to be about Batman's flaws, his limitations, as just a human being existing in a world of gods. But Tom King does not feel comfortable enough to show Batman actually have flaws, to show his limitations. So you have this storyline that's trying to present Batman as not the most OP motherfucker ever, but then constantly writing him as the most OP motherfucker ever. And that is the very big crux of the whole problem. It's a storyline that is very clearly in conflict with itself. And Tom King, from the way he's talked about this storyline in interviews, he is very clearly one of those obnoxious bat-tard motherfuckers who watched Batman the Animated Series. He watched Justice League. He watched Batman basically go from an actual person in Batman TAS to an overpowered bat god that every stupid Batman dick cocksucker loves in Justice League. And he's trying to combine the two, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. It just creates a really obnoxious storyline for a whole multitude of reasons. Especially because, and it's especially annoying because Detective Comics by James Tynion, of all people, is doing everything this book is doing and doing it a lot better. This book is trying to frame itself as showing that Batman needs other people, that Batman is a different person after the events of Endgame, that his regeneration has changed him, that he's a softer person, that he's a better person, that he's more willing to cooperate with people. And James Tynion's Detective Comics does all of that shit well. Batman in Detective Comics is not a shithead like he is in Tom King's Batman. He actually treats his partners with respect. There's a whole angle going on in Detective Comics and in Batman where the government is trying to adapt Batman's modus operandi and using it to basically adapt it to the military, which makes a lot of sense because Batman is like the pinnacle of achievable human intellect, cunning, and strength. So it would make sense that someone would look at this guy and say, hey, if we made an entire army of like US Marines that think and fight and act like this guy, we would have like the most badass army ever. And both Detective Comics and King's Batman are trying to do that, except Tynion's Batman does it considerably better, especially because King's whole thing is really fucking stupidly vague. Like, Amanda Waller is doing something, but then she's not doing something, but she's kind of involved in here, and it just doesn't make any sense. Detective Comics, like I already said, it already gives you a better grasp of Batman's post-Endgame character where he stopped being a dickhead. He's more open to cooperating with people. But in Tom King's Batman, he treats Gotham and Gotham Girl like shit for no reason. Batman also gets captured in Detective Comics and he has to rely on other people to save himself. But in Tom King's Batman, Batman calls the entire fucking Justice League to fight Gotham. And Gotham pretty much kicks the entire Justice League's ass, except Batman's, because he's fucking Batman. And in a storyline that's trying to frame Batman as trying to find his own place in a world, in a Gotham City that might need him anymore, Batman is taking out a dude who just beat up the fucking Justice League. Do you understand the core crux of the problem? And I'm not going to say all of Tom King's writing. Well, all right. Well, there is one more thing I want to say about this: the core, way that Tom King writes Batman. Another problem with Tom King's Batman is that he just writes Batman like anybody could write him. He has no distinct voice for the character. I feel like when Scott Snyder or Morrison or even Denny O'Neil or pretty much any good Batman writer ever has done is that when you read their comic book, you know that this is their Batman. You can feel the writer behind the story giving you his voice for the characters. And Tom King's Batman does not have that. It feels like you could have gotten anybody to write this thing and it wouldn't be any significantly different. In fact, after reading some of the Red Hood stuff by Scott Lobdell, which is a lot of fun, and I'm really, really enjoying that, I wouldn't mind it if they just gave Scott Lobdell the main Batman ongoing book, because he actually writes Batman as a person, because in the Red Hood comic book, Batman, when he finds Jason Todd, he doesn't beat him up, he doesn't berate him, he's like, hey kid, you look hungry? You want to get a sandwich with me? And then he and Jason, just talk when they meet their first night on the Batmobile and eating sandwiches. And that's fucking great. That's Batman actually being a character, and that would fit in with this post-Endgame version of Batman. But here, he's just an asshole to people for no good reason. And when he's not being an asshole, he just doesn't have anything really approaching a personality. And I just don't know. It just doesn't work. I don't get the praise for this book. It just does not work in a lot of ways. Duke Thomas isn't really being set up as a worthwhile, replacement for Robin, I suppose. He's just kind of there. Alfred has this really fucking bizarre moment in one issue where he basically has to go on the field and pretend that he's Batman, in actual costume, and then he just has this weird monologue where he's like, yes, Master Thomas, I shall take care of your son, I shall do all of this stuff. And it's supposed to be sarcastic and snarky, but it just makes Alfred look like some kind of psychotic weirdo, and that doesn't work either. And then there's the art. Finch is an artist I don't really like most of the time, but he's done some things that I've liked. I like him on Avengers Disassembled. I think his new Avengers stuff is actually kind of alright. I think he was actually a good fit for that Scarecrow arc that was being done in the pages of Batman the Dark Knight, that one Batman book that nobody gave a shit about back when New 52 launched. I thought it was all right there. I felt that the grittiness of his art worked in favor of the kind of story that was being told there. But here his art is really just kind of ugly. It doesn't work. There's no real motion behind it. I'm not saying that it looks ugly all the time. There are a couple of places where I thought it does look legitimately good, but there's no real motion to it. Like, Batman does a Taekwondo move on Solomon Grundy, and it looks like nothing. There's no motion there. There's no kinetic energy in the art whatsoever. Everyone just looks kind of like they're always static. No. The way they move is kind of like how you imagine the weeping angels from Doctor Who would move, where when you're not looking at them, they move into a different position, but then they freeze when you're looking at them. And that kind of feels like what's happening on the page, where a character is frozen static one way, and then when you turn the page, all the motion happens while you're returning the page, and now they're in a completely other static position. I don't really know how to explain it better than that, but it is just kind of a fancy way of me saying that the art has no kinetic energy or real motion behind it. And there are lots of comic book artists that actually manage to create a sense of motion through the way they tell the storyline, and I just don't think that Finch is a good fit for this thing. I feel like if you gave this to fucking anybody else, they'd have done a better job. Like, I don't know, I think that if you gave John Romita Jr. The first issue and you told him Batman has to, stop a fucking plane from dropping out of the sky, I think John Romita Jr. would have been able to really kill it. And John Romita Jr. is not an artist I really like, except if he's working on Superman or Batman. So yeah, that's kind of just the crux of my issues with Tom King's Batman. The first arc, at least, is not particularly good. It feels really messy. It feels really clunky. The stuff with Gotham and Gotham Girl isn't particularly captivating. And the run feels really messy because the last issue, the one that came out before this one, from this week, ended on this whole cliffhanger of Batman needing to use his own Suicide Squad to invade Santa Prisca, which is a pretty interesting concept in and of itself. And then we just kind of forget about that completely, and now we're doing Batman's family versus kaiju monsters. And that's what makes this all really, really clunky. Like, this guy is doing this thing that's just kind of whatever, and then Amanda Waller's doing her thing that's also kind of whatever, and it's just a really big mess. And I just don't fucking understand how is it possible that the same guy who wrote The Omega Men, which was fucking amazing, by the way, how could he create something that's so broken on so many different levels, and when it's not broken, it's just kind of generic and boring. This is just not a particularly good book. I don't really have much else to say about it. I think that there is potential that it could salvage itself with the Suicide Squad stuff later on, but as it stands, this is definitively the worst DC Rebirth book I've ever read, and it's really sad for me that after half a decade of a consistently good Batman ongoing series, this book is the one that I just cannot stand, and I'm just dreading its release. While Detective Comics, the other Batman book, which was a big load of nothing for a vast majority of its run, is now my favorite book of the entire Batman line, both writing and art-wise. Like, Eddie Barrow's art is fucking leaps and bounds better than anything Finch has done right here. So yeah, guys, I do not recommend that you check out Tom King's Batman. It's not particularly good, and the only reason you should check it out is to see why this whole mentality of Batman is the best character because he's human, but if you actually write him as a human, you're a fucking shithead, why that whole mentality simply does not fucking work when actually applied to the process of writing an actual fucking storyline.